Perhaps the least understood of all the November ballot measures is number 11, educational choice. Ballot Measure 11 would amend Oregon's Constitution to require an open enrollment plan that would allow students to attend public schools outside of their districts. Provide for a tax credit of up to $2,500 to parents who either educate their children at home or send them to secular or religious private schools. Establish an educational choice fund to reimburse the state for the tax credits allowed parents who provide homeschooling or send their children to secular or religious private schools. And require voter approval of new, more restrictive laws on non-public education. Tonight, we put it to the test of debate, and here to help us, Martin L. Buchanan, who is a member of the Libertarian Party and author of the measure, and Karen Famous, president of the state's largest teachers union, the Oregon Education Association. The OEA is firmly opposed to Ballot Measure 11. Mr. Buchanan, if we could start with you, and we do want to, again, as we've been doing all the ballot measures, pretty much take the essential provisions. This constitutional amendment would require the state to, quote, promote competition and diversity, end quote, by providing for open enrollment. Theoretically, as I understand it, any child could go to any public school, anywhere, in any district, anywhere in the state of Oregon. What's the gist of the idea here?
The gist of the idea is that competition works better than monopoly and central planning, that the more choices we have, the more we create market pressures on the schools to perform, the more we empower parents to vote with their feet for the school of their choice. These sorts of public school choice plans are operating now in Minnesota, in several other states, in districts in Oregon. For example, Portland High Schools, the 4J district in Eugene, Lincoln City has a choice plan, all those within particular districts. We would extend this notion of choice, of course, much more broadly.
Okay. Ms. Famous, so what's the big problem with choice? It sounds so wonderful here.
Well, the public school choice provisions in Minnesota and some other states haven't really yet proved to be remarkably successful. This plan goes much further than any measure that's been even proposed in other states currently, in that it allows the monies for that are now used for public schools that are collected from the taxpayers to go to provide education in even religious schools.
Ms. Famous, if I can, let's put the money issue aside for a minute and deal just with the issue of this failed monopoly of the school system that Mr. Buchanan's talking about, in his sense that if you give parents and students a choice, it'll somehow reinvigorate the system. Is that a concept that at heart you disagree with?
I don't disagree with the idea that parents should have some choices within the public school system at all. I think that does exist, as Mr. Buchanan said at the time. Perhaps it should be expanded. But if we're talking about ed reform, which is education reform, which is a topic that's very much on people's minds right now, this measure does not deal with education reform. This measure deals with tuition tax credits.
All right, let me get to Mr. Buchanan one more time before we get away from this idea. And that is, you talk about market pressures and subjecting the public schools to market pressures. But public schools are not the business world. They can't just whole-scale fire people. They can't turn down students. There's a certain set of givens that seem to apply that don't quite apply to the market.
Well, let's look at where we're at and what we've tried. We're in a situation right now where, according to the U.S. Secretary of Education, American students are the worst in the world among major industrialized nations in mathematics, nearly the worst in science, where we have 40 to 50 million people who can barely read at fourth grade level, another 27 million who are almost completely illiterate, even below that level. And we have done the things that, with all due respect, groups like the Oregon Education Association have suggested. We have added money and added more money and added more money for years. We have reduced somewhat class sizes. We have more standards and studies and regulations to support the work of teachers and more specialists as well.
And in your mind, this is a problem that would be solved by bringing free market economics to the
exactly
to the delivery of
We have a system
Education.
of monopoly and central planning and education. It's time for some glasnost and perestroika. It's worth noting that the education minister of either the Soviet Union or the Russian Republic proposed a few days ago a voucher system in that country.
I just want to make sure, too, Ms. Famous brought up the Minnesota plan. I mean, you brought up the Minnesota plan and said it's just like our many states have this plan. Would you agree that this is really nothing like the Minnesota plan, though? I mean, we're
This
going to
goes
get into
beyond.
the idea of the $2,500 tax cut, but Minnesota didn't provide for that.
That's absolutely correct. By the way, Minnesota does provide right now, under what they call their enrollment options plan, that students in junior and senior year of high school who go and attend private colleges can actually attend religious or secular private colleges and have their tuition paid by the state. A very small push in this direction.
Let's move on to the $2,500
Let's get to
tax
the
credit that Rita was just talking about, which, as I understand it, really pushes this measure out beyond anything that's ever been proposed
Absolutely.
anywhere else in the United States. As I understand it, this would offer a $2,500 tax deduction that would be available to a family that sends their children to private school or homeschooling, teaching them at home. Is that correct?
It goes much further than that. It's a $2,500 tax credit. Whether you've paid taxes or not, you'd receive that credit. Whether you've paid any taxes in Oregon or not, you could be a resident, for example, of Vancouver and send your child to school in Portland, as long as the student is a resident at the time you apply for the tax credit.
Okay.
And it allows for people who are involved in homeschooling to apply for up to the amount to reimburse them for their expenses in the homeschooling.
And your problem with that is?
The public tax dollars are collected for the public school system as it exists right now, and these dollars are distributed to the schools. The state income taxes also supplement the public tax dollars on property taxes. These dollars are distributed to the schools, who have the responsibility for educating every child. We have the responsibility of making sure that there's racial and ethnic...
Let's go to Mr. Buchanan. Why did you include this in this measure? What's the incentive? What's the...
Simply this. We included anything that works. For example, independent schools have a better track record for educating students at lower cost, at better results than the public schools. Homeschooling in the state of Oregon has a better track record than of educating students in the public schools. We know this because homeschooling students are tested every year, and the state keeps statistics, and I've seen those
So
statistics.
is what you're trying to do to provide an incentive so that parents will take their children out of the public school system and send them to private schools,
Not at
parochial
all.
schools, homeschooling?
Let the parents decide. I want to make clear, though, that Karen's position regarding who owns this entitlement is rather unique. We give people an entitlement called food stamps, but we don't insist that they spend their money in government supermarkets. We provide for people's retirement. We don't insist that they live in government retirement homes and spend their Social Security there. We say if we're going to provide a universal educational entitlement, let the people, let the families choose where their children go to school.
Well, all right. Okay. With respect to the $2,500, I want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that that's taken out, then? That's not available to the schools anymore? Are you talking about breaking the public school systems?
Within the public school system, if a student chooses to enroll in a district other than the one in which they live, the school district sends $3,000 to the other school district. If they're in a private school, the school district sends $3,000 to the education trust fund that this sets up, I believe.
Right. Mr. Buchanan, the idea of basically a private school or parochial school voucher system has been put before voters before in Oregon, and it's my understanding it's gone down in flames. That seems to be the crux of this measure. You could have written the bill and just done an educational choice like they did in Minnesota, which applied only to public schools. Why did you have to put this in it?
Well, let me tackle the church-state issue straight on, because I think that's what you're getting at. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, Measure 11 follows the letter of the First Amendment. Secular and religious education are equally eligible. Payments go to individuals and not to institutions. Both constitutional scholars and Oregon's own Legislative Council on January 29th support Measure 11's constitutionality. Now, Measure 11 is just like the GI Bill, which reimbursed tens of millions of veterans for their education in any college, secular or religious.
Accredited.
True.
An accredited school.
Correct.
All right.
Any attack on Measure 11's constitutionality then would also be an attack on the constitutionality of the GI Bill.
Let's famous just one last thread he left dangling, and that is the idea that homeschooling has a better record than public school system in the state of Oregon.
And he also said that the private schools have a better record than the public schools. But the fact that parents have chosen that school, or that the school is a private school, or that the children are homeschooled, may not be the reason that happens. The reason may be that the particular people who choose to homeschool their children are more interested in their children's education and work harder with them.
Well, among the things that are not provided are transportation. So if a child wanted to go from, just pick your school district, if it was a poor child, who's going to pick up the tab for that?
Now, we've left the details of public school choice to the legislature simply because there are a lot of details and because it's operating in other states. So the legislature can hold the appropriate hearings, look at these plans in other states, and pick the best features for Oregon, which is what we want.
But you don't know right now how that
I can tell you how I think it'll work. I can tell you that in Minnesota, for example, the complete transportation costs for low-income students are paid by the state, and I absolutely support that.
Let me pursue this just a little bit. Mr. Buchanan, the argument that I've heard supporters of this make is that this measure is going to most benefit minority students, people from impoverished families that are in school districts that are currently being disserved, perhaps maybe even your poor students. The measure passes, I'm a parent or I'm a student and I apply to a private school. I don't automatically get in. It's up to a private school whether or not to accept me. And in fact, it seems to me that to a certain degree, this measure is less, is it possible that this measure is less a educational choice for the student, but rather an educational choice for the school? I mean, the school is now going to get to choose who it wants. There's no guarantee that that student who's currently getting a lousy education is going to be able to move elsewhere.
It's educational choice for both. But let's understand that there is no motive for insidious discrimination by schools. One, most independent schools are nonprofit and dedicated to serving a diverse student population, and many, many of them offering scholarships right now, even though they're just limping by financially.
What of Mr. Kafori at the top of this show's comment that basically this measure would provide a tax credit to fund a school that could be racist, could be segregationist, that could offer any sort of curriculum? This measure would provide for a student not only to go there, to provide him a tax credit to do so.
A tax credit would be provided for a student who goes to a school where you and I would find the beliefs they're teaching, things that we strongly disagree with. Now, tolerance is the flip side of freedom.
Risk you're worth taking?
Wait,
is that what you're
So
saying?
if we set up, say, the Young Aryan Nation School and gave tax credit for it, that'd be okay with you?
I'm not saying it'd be okay with me. Let's point out there are no such private schools right now.
The point I believe that's important in this is that this does allow a choice for parents to choose based on things such as their philosophical views and values, as opposed to the educational quality provided. I believe that it will set up the opportunity for discrimination or for children to be left behind, for the so-called white flight in your inner city schools. I believe that that's very possible because it does not have transportation provisions in it. Those people who can afford to pay the tuition up front will take their children to the schools that they think are so-called quality. You could even have Madison Avenue type advertising paid for by tax dollars.
Well, let's see what happens. All right. Karen Famous, we thank you. Martin Buchanan, we thank you.
About Ballot Measure 11 is that it's not about choice. It's about taxpayers paying money so that some people can send their children or keep their children in private schools and get us to pay for it.
Private schoolers and homeschoolers are paying in to the tax base that funds the schools, but they're getting no benefit from it. The Educational Choice Initiative would not take any new money. It wouldn't raise taxes. I think in a free society, as we are supposed to have, that we should allow for diversity and not force people to submit to the will of the majority. If their children don't seem to fit into the mold that the system wants to perpetrate, then they should be allowed to go somewhere where they can learn their own way.
Well, let me just tell you that I've been reading about your proposition and how much the President and I support the idea of choice in our education systems. We feel that choice will bring about genuine reform. And let us realize on who our target is. Our target is the children, our kids. And we're not going to be concerned about any bruises that may be inflicted upon the so-called education establishment, because we want to do what is best for our children. Right. And we feel that the quality in education has been lacking. We feel that it's time to shake up the education system, make some changes. We know, for example, that what's happening today is not working. You know that, I know that, the President knows that. And here you are, some dedicated citizens that are interested in making a constructive change, and more power to you. You know, we have competition about every other sector of our society, except education and kindergarten through 12th grade. We've got tremendous competition in higher education. And our higher education is the envy of the world. We've got the best higher education system in the world. Well, one of the reasons I believe that we've got a tremendous higher education system is because we've got competition. And I've often made the analogy that as we look around the world and we see all these changes taking place in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe going toward more competition. Matter of fact, in Poland they're talking about a voucher system. In the Soviet Union they're talking about choice. They are now discarding the shackles of monopoly and total government control, and they want to open up the system, and they're not the least bit bashful about opening up the education system as well. So I certainly wish you the very best and a very vigorous effort. And I was talking with my former colleague Bob Packwood the other day, and he said that he was supporting the idea of choice in the education system. I don't know if you'd had any discussion with him, but he said no. I said I think it's time that we do something like that.
Write him a letter.
Yeah, write him a letter.
Because this island area is designated as Oregon City School District by boundaries that were set 30 or 40 years ago, our children, once they reach the 7th grade, are bused to these schools down here in the Oregon City area, when in fact we just live a few blocks from these schools. And so we want our children to be able to go to the close neighborhood schools. We've worked on this issue of trying to allow our children to go to close neighborhood schools for 4 years now. But we've had to go through such a tremendous amount of red tape and bureaucracy just so our kids could walk down the block to school.
But I'm a parent. I'm very concerned about the education of my children. I have a son in college now who went to our local school district, which is in Washington County, a small school district there. But I have a daughter who, when she was ready for her freshman year in high school, showed a lot of talent for foreign language. There was no foreign language programs offered in our local school. Nothing beyond conversational German and some basic Spanish. We thought that we could go to school anywhere we chose to go. And in learning about Portland schools, we have a business in Portland. My husband and I work together in our own business. And we're right across the street from Lincoln High School every day. And it turns out that Lincoln has an outstanding Russian language program. So we thought, well, this is ideal. We can bring her to work each day with us and take her to school. We enrolled her using our business address in Portland, where we own the building and we pay property taxes in Portland. A very high amount of our income goes to property taxes into the school district in Portland. About 3 weeks into the school year, they very abruptly removed her from class because they had discovered that she did not live in Portland. That was not our residence address. And they were quite rude about it, as a matter of fact. They said, she can't go to any more classes until you give us a check We were quite shocked to find that we were going to have to come up with about $5,000 for our daughter to be able to attend a school of our choice, a public school. But we borrow money, a financial burden for us.
Great.
We are paying school taxes in 2 counties. We pay Washington County school taxes, approximately $2,000 a year on our home. We pay Portland property taxes, about $3,000 a year to the Portland School District, and we pay $5,000 a year for tuition in a Portland public school.
Some people think that the ballot measure will destroy public schools. There are some very, very good public schools, very dedicated teacher. For me, the point is it good? That should be the first question,
Right.
always, always, for every single child.
Yes.
And a parent's opinion of that should be important in the process. And I don't believe the schools are going to fall down. And I really do think they can compete, and the whole system will be healthier.
Why should students have to go to a bad school? Okay, I had one person come up to me at the convention center today and say, well, if we have educational choice, that will mean that students in bad schools will try to go to good schools. And he was afraid of that, okay? Why should we have children go to bad schools? You know, I would argue that if a school that is inferior cannot improve itself, why should it be there in the first place? Why should we condemn a certain group of children to an inferior education?
This measure promotes parental involvement.
That's a very good point. I think research everywhere shows and supports what you just said about parental involvement and student commitment in a school of choice. Various programs that have involved different kinds of school choice across the country, you know, have demonstrated this, and it's documented in studies. So choice works from the standpoint of commitment and involvement.
Easier to reward the teachers who are doing a good job. I think as the bureaucracy is now, from what I've seen of my own experiences in school and with 2 children, is that the bureaucracy often stifles the teachers too.
1955, we were an almost completely literate nation. It has certainly changed since. It was about that time that they got this look-say or sight reading adopted in most of the schools. And then in the 60s, I became aware that many children were being labeled dyslexic because they couldn't understand that method. Because a child, when he goes to school, knows at least 3,000 words phonically, and then all he needs to be is to bridge over to the written word, sound it out, and he knows another word. Anyway, I was assured in the early 70s that they had gone to phonics, but that was just talk. And when this measure was started, within about 2-3 weeks I heard of it, and I thought, well, now this is the answer. We finally have an answer. Because do you think General Motors would still make bad cars if the customer refused to buy them and bought somebody else?
Oregonians for Educational Choice Committee, by choice we mean choice not only between government schools or public schools, but also include in that category private schools. Many people have actually used the word choice, but sometimes they're corrupting that because by choice they mean choice only among government schools, which would only mean the open enrollment part of the measure, Measure 11. We want to emphasize that by choice we mean choice between government schools and private schools. If somebody said that you could go to any grocery store you want as long as it's Safeway, we laugh at that because we know that's not really choice. And we're trying to use the same point with schools. If your only choice is between government schools, then you don't really have a choice.
Today we're confused about the tuition tax credit. And I guess the easiest way I can explain it to anyone out there that might be confused about it is like, look, say I have a car and I want to sell it to you, and you give me your money and I don't give you your car. You're going to be pretty upset. You know, that's what's happening to to the education system when parents decide they want to send their kids to a private school. They're saying, okay, well, you're not using the service, but you're going to have to pay for it anyway. And so what that does is that restricts private schools to really the upper crust.
The really positive aspects of educational choice is that they've done some research on this, and the research shows that if 10% of our Oregon population utilizes choice, and they send their children to other than public schools, then the plan more or less breaks even as far as costs go to the taxpayers. If 20% of our population in Oregon utilizes the choice plan, then the government can realize a savings, the Oregon government can realize a savings of up to $100 million a year. I think that's very exciting.
Thing that surprised me, the state came up with an impact and said the worst impact would be $67 million. Well, that seems like a lot of money, but you realize that the money the school districts have is a total of $3 billion. Now,
That's B as in...
$3 billion. Now, that 67 million is less than 3% of the budget. And when you stop to realize that every school district gets 6% increase every year automatically. So it would only take away half of that if nobody changed. And of course, most of us really want to improve the public schools, because most will go to public schools. And you can't really get an improvement unless you put a little freedom in there and make them treat the families as customers. And I can tell you, I've never encountered a mother that's put her children through schools who won't say that she was treated rather shabbily. If there were any problems.
Both of my children were shown at an early age as being in the talented and gifted range, which we found out very early on is quite a handicap in the school system. This is not a good thing when your child is talented and gifted if you want to be happy in life. But we felt that we had to provide a special education for our children. The way she felt about school always was that it was not a good place to be.
I think it's important to emphasize here that we, the taxpayers, have thrown money at this problem of declining quality of the education that kids are getting. Test scores show that they're getting down at the bottom of the heap on science and math and so forth. You have to ask, why is this? And the educrats, so to speak, pardon the polemics, feel that it's just money. Just throw more money at the schools and that'll solve the problem. But that hasn't worked because they have gotten more money. Over the last 10 years alone, I think they've gotten increases of something like 40% over and above the rate of inflation. Worked. So I think maybe we ought to try something other than money. Maybe money is not the problem.
For a solid year, I went to the budget meetings. I went through every single page of the budget book, and I've educated myself, and believe me, the abusive spending in our school districts is out of control, and it is not, I believe, at the teacher level.
First, I'd like to say that I have a lot of educators in my family. My mother works in a public school with disturbed children. My uncle's a vice principal at a school. My brother-in-law is a wrestling coach and a teacher in public schools. And these are all in Minnesota where they have open enrollment. And all of them have said that open enrollment has been good for the public schools. It has not damaged the public schools. There haven't been these massive flights from one school to another school. If we have educational choice, then it'll be better for the parents, better for the schools, and better for the kids. You know, the only ones that are really opposing this are the bureaucrats who stand to lose control over the school system in favor of the parents where it belongs in the first place.